When the St. Louis Blues go marching in, when the St. Louis Blues go marching in, they think that they're gonna win Stanley Cup, but they did so. Oh crap! Gloria! I hate that song. I hate that song. Anyway, the St. Louis Blues are the current NHL Stanley Cup champions, 2019. They finally won a Stanley Cup after so many years of failure and all that. So anyway, the St. Louis Blues were part of the Great Expansion in 1967 with Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Philly, California, and Los Angeles. Well, California has the Golden Hills like in Oakland, San Francisco. So the St. Louis Blues actually had the biggest glitz and glamour home opener, but it delayed the game 90 minutes, and the fans weren't really happy about it. So anyway, the Blues came out on top as the first Western Division champion of all time. Not regular season, but a playoff champion, as they beat Minnesota in Game 7 of the division finals to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. The overtime goal by Roddy Shocked. The Blues would be shocked themselves as they took on the Montreal Canadiens, the ever-present Montreal Canadiens. The Blues had aces up their sleeve. They had Jacques Plante, Doug Harvey, Dickie Moore, among others, former Canadians who were St. Louis Blues. Despite the fact that the Habs swept the Blues in 68 and 69, the Blues in 68 actually did better than expected. They only lost by one goal each time, so they only lost by 4 goals combined in 4 games. Most times, you don't get that. The Blues surprisingly went to the 1970 Stanley Cup Finals again because they had the veteran leadership of Scotty Bowman beyond the bench and with Glenn Hall and Jacques Plante a good two-faced goaltending duel, two-headed, if you will. Glenn Hall was good, but the Blues were much better, taking down Glenn Hall and the Blues in that famous Bobby Orr Game 4 when Noah Picard, the St. Louis defenseman, tripped him up. So St. Louis versus the world, 0-12. Because of this embarrassment, the NHL decided to switch things up and put Chicago in the Western Division and make the playoff format a little bit harder for Western teams to get through. And of course, that happened as Montreal took on Chicago in the 1971 Stanley Cup Finals. Bowman was fired early in '72, and he landed on his feet in Montreal. The Blues actually had a great playoff record. From 1979 to 2004, they made the playoffs every freaking year. And they missed in 2004. They did get, I believe, Barrett Jackman as the #1 pick in 2006. I might be wrong. But anyway, the Blues were being densely populated. However, from 79 to 2004, things happened. In the 1980s, the Blues were put in the North Division with Detroit, Toronto, Minnesota, and Chicago. St. Louis had a great playoff run in 1986 when they got all the way to the NHL semifinals. The Blues had troubles with Minnesota and Toronto, but got past them both in 7 games. It's weird to see that the Blues had to take 7 games to take down the Leafs. Although the Leafs actually did St. Louis a favor by knocking off the #1 seed Chicago Blackhawks in the division first round. The Blues would face Calgary in a famous 7-game series. That's more notorious for Game 6 when Duck Wickenheiser scored the overtime winning goal to put the series to a Game 7 in Calgary. St. Louis was actually down, I believe it was 4-1 late in the third period, and then they put on a Monday Night Miracle. Or was it 5-2? I think it was 5-2, and then St. Louis did all that. Great job. But St. Louis, unfortunately, would not get much better. All that. The Blues blew a great opportunity, pardon the pun, in 1991 when they were the second best team in the NHL, only one back of Chicago. St. Louis actually faced Detroit and were close to being KO'd in the first round. They were down 3-1 to the Red Wings. But strange as it sounds, St. Louis put up 3 straight wins. What's even stranger is that Detroit actually came back from a 3-1 deficit themselves the next year against the North Stars. St. Louis would take on the Minnesota North Stars, who shocked Chicago. St. Louis thought, hey, you know what? Let's do it. After all, in '86, they got a gift when Toronto took down Chicago. However, St. Louis shockingly lost in 6 games to the North Stars, who then basically shocked everyone by going to the Stanley Cup Finals and having a 2-1 series lead on the Pittsburgh Penguins, but Mario led Pittsburgh to the Cup. St. Louis would be pissed off. However, a couple years later, in '93, they were famous for being the 4 seed in the North Division, and the last time the division playoffs were right there with 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, 2 versus 3. Sorry. When all of a sudden St. Louis pulled a rabbit out of their hats and beat the Chicago Blackhawks, who were supposed to be the best team in the Western Conference. After all, they were a year removed from the Stanley Cup Finals. Not only did the Blues beat the Blackhawks, they swept the Blackhawks. That's right. If you can forget. The overtime goal in St. Louis in Game 4, Ed Belfour slamming a stick angrily as he thought he was interfered with. And he had a point, but they didn't refute that. The Blues would take on the Toronto Maple Leafs, who also made it upsetting and knocking off a better team. That would be Detroit. Toronto had home ice, of course, in that series. The Blues had Curtis Joseph, who was going through a renaissance. Unfortunately, Cujo would not do well in Game 1 as Doug Gilmour wrapped around the goal in double overtime to sink him. However, St. Louis's all-star defenseman Jeff Brown got the Leafs back with a double overtime goal of his own in Game 2. They traded off victories until Game 7 in Toronto when Cujo was just not himself, giving up 6 goals. Can you believe it? He gave up 6 freaking goals to the Leafs and all that. It didn't really ruin his confidence, but it ruined St. Louis's hopes of making Cujo better. The Blues basically dumped him off to Edmonton a few years later and got Grant Fuhr. Grant Fuhr pulled off one of the biggest moments in history by starting the first 76 games for the Blues. No backup needed. Unfortunately, Grant Fuhr was unintentionally injured by Nick Kypreos in Game 2 of their series against the Leafs, first round series against the Leafs, even though people said that he did it on purpose. Grant Fuhr was out. John Casey, who led the '91 North Stars to the Stanley Cup Finals appearance, came in for the Blues, and he did pretty well. Heck, the Blues almost pulled a rabbit out of the hat against the 62-win Detroit Red Wings in round 2. They got them to a Game 7, and Game 7 was epic. 0-0 after regulation and an overtime. But unfortunately, even though the Blues spared no expense by getting Gretzky to help him with Brett Hall, Gretzky was the one who made the bad turnover that got Steven Yzerman the puck, and Stevie Y scored the winning goal over Casey's shoulder in double overtime. Can't blame the Blues. They couldn't retain Gretzky, so it's a problem. The Blues really didn't really have much of a playoff run. 2001, they were actually close to going to the conference. They went to the conference finals. Unfortunately, Colorado sunk them in 5 games. Brad Johnson actually pulled a rabbit out of his hat in 2002 in the first round against the Blackhawks by putting 3 shutouts on the board, and everyone was shocked. 3 straight shutouts at that. And then, of course, the Blues missed the playoffs and then had the Barrett Jackman thing. Heck, the Blues in 2000, this could have been the what if, because the Blues were the 1 seed in the 2000 playoffs in the West, and yet the San Jose Sharks shocked them, especially with a goal that actually went over Roman Turek's head from center ice. But when it came down to it, the what if I'm doing for St. Louis, it's a season that I think a lot of people probably didn't think I was going to do. But anyway, so the Blues, the 2010s, they looked good in the first round. I never picked them because their freaking goaltending always chokes in the playoffs. Most times, often they're not proving me right. But St. Louis got rid of their legacy of failure. Urinating Tree still has his video up, but for prosperity. One good thing about the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup Championship is the story of Leah Anderson, the childhood cancer survivor who was the super fan and actually got a Stanley Cup ring, which is one of the most amazing things ever in history. So anyway, I digress. This is the reason why I'm doing this. The 1981 St. Louis Blues is my what if. You're thinking, what? Damn, 1981? Are you off your rocker? Partially, but hear me out. The St. Louis Blues actually ended up with the 2nd best record in the NHL. I kid you not. In 1981, the NHL did the Stanley Cup playoffs and made it 16 teams. The top 16 teams got to go to the playoffs, 1 to 16, no matter what the division is, and all that. I think that's how they did it, based on regular season points. It did ruined things because Buffalo was number 5. They were the Adams champion, but Los Angeles jumped in ahead of them. But that's all right. The St. Louis Blues won 107 points, 3 short of number 1, that being the New York Islanders, the defending Stanley Cup champions. The number 2 St. Louis Blues took on the 15-seed Pittsburgh Penguins. And lo and behold, Pittsburgh actually put a scare in the Blues. The Blues had to win Game 5 in overtime, if memory serves me correctly. I'm just going to scan down. Yeah, Mike Crombie in double overtime sunk the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins almost shocked the Blues. This, of course, is the same playoff year as a few other series that I think I mentioned in earlier iterations. In 1981, that was when Edmonton took on the number 3 seed Montreal Canadiens, and Montreal goalie Richard Sevier said he would put the Oilers and Wayne Gretzky in his back pocket, not realizing that his comments could be translated by Kevin Lowe, because Kevin Lowe, even though he was the first English-speaking captain of the Quebec Ramparts of the Quebec Junior League, he knows French, and unfortunately, Kevin Lowe told his teammates, and of course, Edmonton swept them. Instead, this was also when Philadelphia. I said Philly and Quebec in 1981. Quebec with that big game 4 overtime goal by Dale Hunter, or no, Stashny, and then Philadelphia won Game 5. I think I've also mentioned this series when the Oilers won, because I said the young Oilers took on the Islanders in 1981 and got played. And I think I mentioned this for Calgary in 1981 because Calgary took on Philadelphia and won Game 7 against the Flyers before losing to the North Stars. But hear me out. The St. Louis Blues were the second best team out there. They would take on the 7th seed New York Rangers. And you're thinking, they were the 7th seed? What's that, Calgary? No, they reseeded the pairings after each round. The best team took on the worst team still there. And it was the New York Islanders against the Edmonton Oilers. The Rangers would take on the St. Louis Blues in the second round. Buffalo, Minnesota, Philly, Calgary. Unfortunately for St. Louis, they suffered a big raff as they got shocked by the New York Rangers in 6 games. So, unfortunately, that means that things looked bad. I mean, the number 2 seed, and you couldn't even beat a group of ragtag New York Rangers. What are you thinking? Obviously, they weren't thinking at all. So, with St. Louis winning this what if, of course, we reversed the decision. The New York Islanders, St. Louis Blues, the Calgary Flames, and the Minnesota North Stars. Now, because the Islanders were number 1, St. Louis was number 2, Calgary was number 7, and Minnesota was number 9, if I'm remembering right. Everything gets reseeded. So it is Minnesota against the Islanders and Calgary St. Louis in this one. So St. Louis will deal with Calgary in this what if. So we are on our way. It's Calgary and St. Louis. 1981 semifinals. The winner will face the New York Islanders. Maybe we'll see Islanders Blues. Who knows? Now, first game went to Calgary, 8-6. 4 goals in the first period. McMillan and Bobby McMillan with pair goals for the Flames. The Blues have Wayne Babbage and Perry Turnbull. Bob Murdoch, who later became a coach, he scored on the power play there. Willie Plett made it 4-2 Flames. Kent Nielsen made it 5-2 Flames. Mike Liut, who was supposed to be the superstar goalie, is yanked for Stanowski. And Dan LeBratin made 6-2 Flames. Brian Sutter for the Blues, the consolation goal. Flames went up 8-3. Randy Holt got ejected for a major elbow for the 81 Flames. And that helped the Blues because they scored the last 3 goals. Perry Turnbull, Brian Sutter, and Jorgen Pettersson. And in the end, it was over 8-6. Reggie Lumberland, a hero. McMillan, Chouinard, Brian Sutter. The 3 stars of the game. Game 2. St. Louis 6-4. Petra Ratacalio scored, but the Blues scored 4 quick goals. LaPointe, Frederico Sutter, and Blake Dunlop. Jorgen Pettersson made it 5-1 before Bouchard came into the net for the Flames. Bob Murdoch and Ratacalio made it 5-3. Tony Curry made it 6-3. And then Eric Bale made it 6-4. So Dan Bouchard did well in net. Brian Maxwell got injured. The 3 stars Dunlop, Ratacalio, and Pettersson. Ratacalio. Well, they're off to the Stampede Corral. I hope they say it's the Stampede Corral. Like this very small rink. And the small rink helps the Blues with a 6-5 win. Blake Perry Turnbull for the Blues. Kent Nielsen, Willie Plett. 2-2. Blair Chapman made it 3-2. Jurgen Pedersen 4-2. Federico 5-2. By Lemelin, you're out. Willie Plett made it 5-3. Flames twice came close. McMillan failed, but they couldn't win. Anyway, Chapman, Plett, Pedersen, the 3 stars of the game. St. Louis up 2-1. Yep, the Calgary Corral. Ah, what are you going to do? What can you do? Blues in overtime 6-5. Blake Dunlop and Bernie Federko. Bernie Federko scoring 2 goals. 3-0 Blues. They look good. Eric Vale scores to make it 3-1. Brian Sutter goes for a goal, and then Perry Turnbull 5-1. Blues are winning. They're going to probably do it. And Lemon again goes out of the net for Bouchard. Bob McMillan made it 5-2. Phil Russell made it 5-3. Ruta Kallio made it 5-4. And then Denla Braden in the final few minutes scored. But in the end, for Durkel, quickly in overtime from Stewart and LaPointe. Let's talk about the 81 Blues. As you see, they had Sutter, Brian Sutter, Dunlop, Babbage, Rick LaPointe, Bill Stewart, Maxwell, Jerry Hart, former Islander, Jurgen Pedersen, Perry Turnbull, Joe Micheletti, really? Bernie Federico, Ikea, Mike Suk, Tony Curry, Blair Chapman, Jack Brown, Shido, Larry Patty, Chuck Leslie, Guy Chouinard, Willie Plett, Phil Russell, Randy Holt, Ruta Kallio, Reinhardt, Murdoch, Vale, Nielsen, Grant Marsh, Bert Wilson, Laver, Bobby McMillan, Bill Clement, LeBratton and Ken Houston for the 81 Flames. The first year that they came over from Atlanta. Dan Bouchard's done much better as a backup for Durkel, Stewart, and Sutter, the 3 stars. So the Flames obviously need somebody. So here comes Bouchard. And there goes Bouchard as the Blues go to the Stanley Cup Finals to take on the New York Islanders 6-3. Scored Brian Sutter, Wayne Babbage, and Tony Curry for the Blues. Guy Chouinard made it 3-1. Eric Vale made it 3-2. Flames trailing, but Mike Suk made it 4-2. Who's Mike Suk? Brian Sutter 5-2. Brian Sutter gets a hat trick to make it 6-2. Ruta Kallio scored to make it 6-3. Unfortunately for the team, it just wasn't meant to be. Brian Sutter, Wayne Babbage, Tony Curry. Tony Curry sounds like a rugby player or a soccer player. So, the 81 Blues will now take on the 81 New York Islanders, 1 versus 2, in the semifinals. In the Stanley Cup Finals. Mike Lute versus Billy Sniff. See what Game 1 does. Well, the Blues tried, but they lose 5-4 in Game 1. Federico scored the first goal of the game, but the others put 3 more on the board. Brian Trottier, Clark Gillies, Bob Bourne. Wayne Babbage made it 3-2. Mike Suk made it 3-3. It was huge, but the others scored a couple of goals. Brian Trottier scored. John Tonelli scored an empty net goal. Perry Turnbull actually scored a goal with 19 seconds left, but in the end it was not meant to be. So the others winning, Billy Smith, Potvin, Trottier, Dave Lagerlund. Why is he? Oh, gets 3 saves. The assist. Teddy Potvin got 4 assists. Nice. Game 2 sees the Blues lose in overtime. Brian Trottier made it 1-0 in the first. Brian Sutter made it 1-1. Bob Bourne with a pair of goals to make it 3-1. Turnbull 3-2. Wayne Babbage made it 3-3. The others were a little nervous. Mike Bossy early in the third made it 4-3. Wayne Babbage 4-4. Bernie Federico made it 5-4. And they had the lead. But on the power play, thanks to a Blake Dunlop penalty, Andres Keller made it 5-5. In overtime at 12:35, Clark Gillies gets a rebound and scores the winning goal. So Bob Bourne, Wayne Babbage, Brian Trottier, your 3 stars of the game. Clark Gillies is the overtime hero. 1-1. No, 2-0, sorry. They went back to St. Louis, and the Blues actually win the game 5-3. Nice. No scoring in the first period. No penalties, though. Bernie Federico, 1-0. Early on, Jerry Hart gets ejected for high sticking. So he's got Wayne Babbage made it 2-0. Anders Kaller on a power play goal made it 2-1. But the Blues struck quickly. Brian Sutter, Harry Turnbull, and Jurgen Pedersen made 5-1. Jerry Howitt and John Tonelli made it 5-3. Jerry Hart got ejected. Well, Babbage for Durko, Tonelli 3 stars. So Billy Smith probably not happy with losing a game. Game 4 saw the Islanders win in overtime 7-6. Perry Turnbull scored first for the Blues. Clark Gillies made it 1-1. Anders Kaller made it 2-1. Wayne Babbage tied it at 2. Blake Dunlop made it 3-2. Anders Kaller tied. Perry Turnbull made it 4-3. Mike Bossy made it 4-4. And then Perry Turnbull made it 5-4. Blake Dunlop 6-4. So with 10 minutes left in the game, they decided to yank Billy Smith. Clark Gillies scores a couple of goals, including one shorthanded when Lajaman was in the box, tied at 6, and then Bob Bourne at 6:20 scored in overtime. 7-6. Bourne, Gillies, and Turnbull, 3 stars. So the Islanders have a chance to win the series in 5 at home. And they don't. The Blues force a game 6. Danny Potvin scored a goal. Make 1-0. The Islanders got themselves into penalty trouble with Lorimer and Trottier in the box. Wayne Babbage made it 1-1. And then Wayne Babbage made it 2-1. Mike Bossy and Bob Bourne made it 3-2 cupcakes. Perry Turnbull tied it at 3. Dennis Potvin made it 4-3. Trottier made it 5-3. Leo got yanked before the start of the third period. Brian Sutter made it 5-4. And then he got himself ejected for cross-checking. Jurgen Pedersen scored a shorthanded goal to make it 5-5. And then a double minor to Ken Morrill for high sticking ruined it. Wayne Babbage made it 6-5 with a hat-trick goal. But the Islanders in the final 3 minutes, Mike Bossy tied the game at 6. First period, lots of overtime. Double overtime. Blake Dunlop at 108 from Blair Chapman. Amazing, all these people. Babbage, Potvin, Bossy. The Blues won without Brian Sutter. So it's kind of complicated, but we'll see what Game 6 brings. Oops. Sorry, that was a mistake. That's in St. Louis. That was not on purpose. But the St. Louis Blues, I think, would have lost anyhow. So 4-2. The Islanders do win the Stanley Cup. Anders Kaller scores. Make it 1-0. Brian Sutter tied it at 1. Stefan Persson made it 2-1. Bernie Ferdurkel tied it at 2. Clark Gillies made it 3-2, and then Stefan Persson made it 4-2 to ice the game, and the Islanders win the Stanley Cup. So the 81 Islanders did win the Cup. Potvin, Gillies, Trottier, Bourne, Persson, Lajaman, Lorimer, Moore, Tonelli, Bossy, Kaller, Goring, Hector Marini, Jerry Howlett, and Gordon Lane, the lesser-known guys. The Blues, try as they might, just couldn't do it. Stefan Persson, Brian Trottier, Clark Gillies. Your 3 stars of the game. So that's all she wrote, and the Blues don't go marching in. They went marching into the finals and got marched out by the Islanders.